Hi guys, Mimi G here with another Sew Along. Today we're going to be working on one of my new simplicity patterns, pattern 8639, which is this really fun summer dress with built-in power mesh. Let's get started. Now if you're new to sewing or want to learn to sew, make sure and visit sewitacademy.com for in-depth step-by-step sewing lessons. Now if you just need a refresher course, make sure and visit the Sewing Basics video, which is linked in the description box below. Okay, we're going to be working on pattern 8639, which is this fantastic dress, and it comes in two length variations. The dress is sewn exactly the same, so you decide on the length. Nothing else changes. On the back of the pattern envelope, you have a list of suggested fabrics. Also, you have a list of yardage requirements and any notions that you're going to need, like an invisible zipper and a 1/4 inch wide elastic. What I really love about my new pattern is that we've included power mesh. In a lot of my fitted bodycon dresses, I built in a sort of Spanx. I like to add support so that I don't have to actually wear Spanx. So I thought it would be very nice to add it to the simplicity pattern. So a really quick note about mesh before we get started. You can get mesh anywhere that swimsuit fabric is sold. They usually have the mesh available as well. I get mine at lowpricefabric.com. What I love is that it comes in different weights and it also has a different amount of, support. Some are very thin and don't necessarily have as much weight. This one is pretty heavy, which is the one that I use for my dresses, so I can avoid, like I said, having to wear Spanx. So you decide on how much support you want to add. This is going to serve as the lining of the dress. Let's go over the pattern pieces you're going to need. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 6, which is the back of the dress. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 9, which is the back lining of the dress. You're going to do pattern piece number 8, which is the front lining. And remember that your two lining pieces are being cut from the power mesh. You're going to cut pattern piece number 4, which is the front of our dress. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 7, which is the bodice front lining, also out of power mesh. Pattern piece number 1, which is our bodice front. Pattern piece number 3, which is our straps. And you're going to cut out pattern piece number 2 out of elastic. So this is an elastic guide. You're also going to cut out pattern piece number 5 out of elastic. Now that we've got all of our fabric and power mesh cut out, we can start sewing. Okay, we're going to start with our front pieces. So right sides facing, I want you to place them over the top of each other. You're going to align your notches and we're going to pin. And now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I want you to stitch from the bottom up until you reach your small dot. Backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Okay, once you've sewn it, I want you to press your seam allowance towards the right front. And now we're going to go ahead and attach our elastic. So using pattern piece number 2, my elastic guide, I've cut my elastic and I transferred my dots. So now I'm going to pin where my dot is, just on the side of my stitching. And I'm going to pin the other one to where my other dot is. And now as you sew, you're going to stretch. And we're going to be using a narrow zigzag stitch. Okay, so I have my needle in before I took out my pin. And I'm going to just stitch and then stitch back. Okay. And now I'm just going to, since it's pinned at the bottom, I'm just going to pull as I'm sewing. And remember, your elastic is right along the side of your stitching, only on your seam allowance. Backstitch. Okay, we're going to go ahead and set this aside. And we're going to sew the front of our dress. And we're going to be doing the same exact thing. So we're going to pin at our dot. Okay, right sides are facing each other. You also have 2 notches, so you want to align your notches. And I'm going to put a pin at the dot so that I know that that's where I'm going to stop stitching. Okay, and we're going to start sewing at the bottom. Okay, so we're going to start sewing at our dot. We're going to stitch all the way up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, all the way until you reach the top and back stitch. Now, same as you did for the bodice, you're going to pin your elastic. I'm going to pin at the top and pin at the bottom. And as you sew, you're going to stretch, sewing just alongside your stitching line, only on your seam allowance, just as we did for the bodice. Okay, once you've placed your elastic onto the seam allowance of your skirt portion, we're going to attach this to our bodice. So grab the one that you've done, and we're going to match up our notches. And we also want to make sure that you are matching up that center front seam. Okay, I'm going to pin at the end. This is just so it all stays where it needs to be. But we're creating the little peak, right? Now, if for whatever reason you don't want the little peekaboo, you don't want the opening, you could just stitch across the entire thing. But we're doing the peekaboo, so we're going to be stitching from the end to the dot that you should have marked and back stitching. So we're going to start at the ends and we're going to stitch towards our dot and back stitch. Okay, we're going to back stitch at the beginning, and we're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to stop at our dot. And back stitch. Now we're going to go to our dot, back stitch, and sew to the end. Okay, so we have our little front opening there, and we went ahead and pressed our seams open. Now we're going to set this aside, and we're going to do the darts on our back. Both your back pieces have a dart, so I want you to go ahead and sew your dart on both pieces. Then we're going to attach at the center back. Okay, once you've sewn your darts, go ahead and give them a good press. Now we're going to stitch the center back until we get to our notch where the zipper is going to be. So you should have had a little dot marking for where your zipper is going to end. So I'm going to start pinning at the bottom. Then again, somewhere along the middle, and I'm going to start stitching at the bottom at the hem. I'm going to stitch up until I get to my marking, and I'm going to back stitch. Okay, next up we're going to be doing our straps. I've already sewn mine together, so you're going to fold in half and with right sides facing and stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to turn it right side out, and you're going to pin it where your markings are. You should have 2 dots in your center front and your front bodice, I should say. Now, you're going to want to make sure that the angle of your strap, it does have a significant angle that you should notice. You want to make sure that it's going down towards the center, not up. So you don't want to place it like this. Your strap should not be facing straight down. So I want to just make sure that you note that. You want to place it so that the angle of that is going down towards the center front. So when held flat, you'll notice that the strap goes out at an angle. And then just go ahead and pin in between your markings, and you're going to stitch that down. You're going to do the same thing with your other strap. Okay, I have my straps tacked down, and now we're going to go ahead and pin and sew the side seam. So with right sides facing, place front to back together, align your notches, and go ahead and pin. You're going to pin your other side seam the same way, head over to your sewing machine and stitch along the entire side seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have your side seam sewn, go ahead and try the dress on, pin the rest of the back, and then try your straps. They're a little long because we want to make sure that they're adjustable for you. So try it on, place the strap where you want it, and then mark it. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start on our lining. So I got my bodice lining and I made the darts in the center. So make sure that you go ahead, make your darts, and then press your darts down. And now we're gonna go ahead and pin together. So you should have 2 notches, pin there. And we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at the bottom and stopping at your dot. Okay, and just like the front of our dress, we're gonna go ahead and pin our skirt front to the bodice. So right side's facing, you're going to pin, matching your notches. And just like you did the front of the dress, you're going to stitch from one end to your dot and back stitch, end to your dot and back stitch. Okay, I went ahead and pressed my seams open. I'm gonna set this aside for just 1 second. I want you to go ahead and sew the back darts and sew your center back, same as you did for your dress. So I made both my darts, I pressed them towards the center, and I stitched the center back seam until my marking for where my zipper is going to end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pin at the side seams. So I'm gonna grab my front, and just like we did the dress, you're gonna go ahead and pin. You're gonna pin your other side seam the same way, and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, with your lining, your power mesh turned wrong side out, and your dress turned right side out, you're gonna slip it inside. And we're gonna pin along the entire top, the back and the front of the bodice. Align your notches, align your side seams. Make sure to align the center front seam. Now we're gonna stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do the entire back and the front bodice and down the back. Okay, we're gonna back stitch at the beginning and at the end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna open my seam allowance on the center front, making sure I have it all in one direction, and I'm gonna stop exactly where that stitching is. Back stitch. And now I want you to move all of it back to the other side and put your needle right where the stitching is. Back stitch. So we're gonna go ahead and understitch. I'm starting about 1.5 inches away from the edge. I have also trimmed my seam allowance down to about half, and I'm gonna make sure that it's facing towards my lining. Now stitching only on your lining about 1/8 of an inch away from your seam line, we're gonna understitch. You're gonna try and go as far as you can. You're going to continue until you've gone around the entire front and back. Okay, now we're going to stitch together our lining and our dress at the peekaboo. So I'm going to start with the bottom first, and I'm going to go ahead and turn under my seam allowance on both the dress and my lining. I'm going to pinch it with my hand. I'm going to stick my hand in between my lining and my dress on the inside so I know exactly where I'm going. And we're going to pin. And I'm gonna pin right where my stitching ends so I know exactly where to stop. Now working only on this seam allowance, we're going to stitch across, connecting our stitches. So wherever you stopped your stitching on each side, that's where you're going to start, and you're going to stitch across and then stop. Okay, so I'm making sure that I'm only working with these two seam allowances. I've put my needle down exactly where my stitching had ended. I'm gonna start there, back stitch just a tad. You're gonna stop at the same exact place, back stitch. You're gonna do the same thing for the top of the opening. Okay, once you're done closing out your opening, you can give it a good press. And now we're going to insert our zipper. So what you're gonna do is, where you have a little notch, you're gonna go ahead and slit until you get to the 5/8 of an inch. So I did that on both my lining and on my fabric, and now we're gonna work as one. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to pin both my lining and my dress together at that center back. And I want you to go ahead and baste these two together. You're gonna do the same thing on the other side. So with that slit, you're going to pin together. And go ahead and baste that other side as well. Okay, so I basted together my lining and my dress, and now I'm gonna baste them, both of them together, so that we could do our invisible zipper. So I'm gonna align my top, and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're just gonna baste. And we're gonna stop. Now go ahead and press your seam open. Okay, we're gonna attach our invisible zipper. So I press my seams open, working only on this seam allowance. I'm gonna place my zipper with the invisible side down and the center of my zipper matching the center of my seam. And I always use an extra long zipper so that my zipper pull can be completely out of the way. And we're just gonna baste this down. I like to use my regular presser foot to do the basting, and then I switch to my zipper foot. You're gonna do the same thing going up the other way. Now go ahead and remove that basting stitch that we created in the beginning. Then open up your zipper. Okay, I've switched to my zipper foot, and now we're going to sew close to our zipper coil. We're just gonna open them up as we're sewing. Back stitch at the beginning. Now starting on the other side from the bottom, do the same exact thing all the way up. Okay, once your zipper is installed, you're going to take the top. I've cut off a lot of my excess, and I'm just going to turn it under, fold my zipper back over, and then I just slip stitch it to the top and along the side for just a little, just to keep it where it's supposed to be. I can afford to trim off a bit more. And catching only the lining, I'm just going to tack it down along the side a bit. Now we have a nice clean finish on the inside, and of course we have a finished invisible zipper in the back. Now the only thing left for you to do is to finish top stitching the slit in the front and of course your hem. So I turned under 5/8 of an inch. You can press it or pin it in place. And then you're going to turn in your hem allowance. I would suggest trying it on, making sure that the length works for you. You might want it a little shorter. Turn over that hem allowance, pin it in place, and then you're going to stitch. Okay, so I'm starting at the hem along one of my slits, and I'm going to stitch. I pressed it so that it's easier for me, and also so that I can have my thread on the top and not the bobbin thread. I'm going to pivot. Back stitch at the end. And now I'm just going to sew along my hem. You're going to continue until you reach the other end, and you are all done. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Please make sure and follow me on Instagram at MimiGStyle. And when you make and post a picture, please tag me at #MimiGStyle. Until next time, peace.